My name is Romana, and I'm the director of EdTech at aiforeducation.org, and I'm very happy that I can today moderate the session. It is great to see the interest in the topic. First, some housekeeping rules from our side. As I just mentioned, please, if you're not talking, mute yourself. We wanted to give everyone the chance to be able to unmute if there will be some time for questions in the end. You will also get a recording, so the session will be recorded, and we will share it with you afterwards. And then lastly, just a heads up, this will not be very interactive session because we want to share this time a lot of what we have learned and to let you listen to the speakers who are experts in the topic, but we will do our best to respond to your questions in the chat and also follow up with you if you have any additional questions. So with that, here is a bit of an overview of what you can expect today. First, we want to introduce a little bit of who we are, what we are doing. Then we will have a guest speaker introducing us a little bit to the context of where this kind of work matter. And afterwards, we will hear again from our team on the key learnings and the key insights that we had over the past months that we were focusing on voice AI for education and assessment. And then last but definitely not least, we will have the three experts coming in and have a bit of an informal fireside chat. We can go to the next slide. And so first, we want to also know who is here in the room. So for this, I would like to hand over to my colleague Orla, who has been also very closely involved in the project, and she will lead us through the Menti session.
Great, thanks, Romana. Yeah, so hi everyone, welcome here today. If everyone could, you can either scan the QR code on the left-hand side, or you can join through the website, the Mentimeter website, and type in this code on top of the page. So I'm just going to share my screen, and there's already people who are starting to contribute. So the first question that we have for everyone is, what sort of background are you coming from? We'd like to know, are you coming from EdTech or more a developer point of view, assessment or literacy, or academic or funder, or any kind of other category? So I see that people are voting. And there should also be the access code is also in the chat. So if anyone's struggling, you can refer to that. Okay, so it seems like we have a balance between some developers and some academics. We have a big other category, so maybe we need to dig into that a little bit more after. Great, let's maybe move on to the next question. So what we'd like to know is what country are you joining us from? Okay, we've got a lot of people from South Africa, it seems. A lot of people from India, Pakistan. Okay, South Africa is winning the race. It's quite, you could watch this for ages, but we'll move on to the next one just for time's sake. So next, what brings you to this topic of voice AI for assessments? You might be currently working on this topic or interested in working on this topic in the future, or you might not be working on this topic at all, but just curious to learn some more. Great, it seems we already have a lot of people who are working in the space, and a lot who are interested in working in it. Okay, nice. We'll move on to the last one. So what do you believe is the biggest challenge that is faced in the voice AI for assessment space? This one might require a little bit more thinking time. Okay, great. And this is really interesting for us as well, because we're hoping to sort of tackle some of these challenges and what these challenges are a little bit later in the conversation, and especially in the fireside chat. So it's really interesting to see lots of challenges that we have, especially around child speech and cost and accuracy. Okay, great. Okay, so it seems the key ones we have here is data collection, child speech, accuracy, and cost. Okay, really interesting. So hopefully this is going to try and help frame the later discussion. I'll stop sharing now and I'll hand back over to Romana and Usman for the slides. Thanks so much, everyone, for sharing your responses in the Menti.
Thank you very much, and great to see the diversity in the group and the interest in the topic. So now we heard a little bit about you, so I think it's just fair to share a little bit about us for those of you who are not so familiar. So we are AI4Education.org is an initiative where we want to help realize the potential of AI to equitably improve the learning at scale, especially in the low and middle income countries. So we do see ourselves as a community where we want to bring together educators, policymakers, and developers and guide the development of the AI educational tools. And when we go to the next slide, you can see a few of the key areas where we are having our focus. One thing that will not surprise you is that how quickly the whole AI world is developing. And we do think it's key to also look into the quality of, on one hand, what is going into these tools, but also then actually collecting the evidence on the AI-powered tool themselves. We also do a lot of training and capacity building for policymakers, developers, and for anyone who is interested. So that's another area where we have a strong focus. We do also create a lot of knowledge products and thought leadership. For those of you who are not familiar, we have a very popular newsletter where we're sharing not only what we have been up to, but also what we see in the sector. So also something you might be interested in. And then to be able to do this well, we also think it's important that we are really doing it ourselves. We have a big data science team and also are doing the product development and support to developers ourselves. Lastly, we do the community engagement, and today you see one example of that. And when we go to the next slide, we come already to the topic of today's discussion. So as we've seen, we have quite a mixed group. So before I talk about what we are doing here, just want to clarify the key terms that we will be talking about today, and that is the voice AI and the difference to the automatic speech recognition. So broader term where we think about the broader technology, which allows the machines to understand, interpret, and also respond to human speech. And it includes all the automatic speech recognition, but also the natural language processing and the text-to-speech. Today, most of what we will be talking about is actually the automatic speech recognition, which is basically converting the spoken word to text. Just mentioning that so that we all have the same starting point. And as you already pointed out very well in one of the questions that Orla shared, when it comes to using this for children, there are some unique challenges with that. However, we do see that there is just huge potential of what this voice AI could do when it comes to education. You know, you can think of problems with how long it takes when you're actually collecting data for assessment, and also how intense it is when it comes to the human that needs to be involved. So we think assessments is one of the key areas where it really can make a difference. But there are also others. This can really help also with, for example, identifying learning disabilities or helping with dyslexia or learning the language, right? So we see there is a lot of what we could unpack. Our organization is focusing now on especially using the use case for assessment, for early grade reading assessment. And it is because we see a lot of potential in it. We see that there is already a lot out there, and that's why we started with mapping on who is doing what, and we will share some of the high-level findings today. We also want to think also outside of the box on how can we actually address some of the challenges which come with the legal side of things, as also some of you mentioned. And then we want to also help advance the field. So on one hand, we want to collect new data. We will do this in Tanzania to start with. And we want to then create new models for early grade reading assessment. And that will be for Swahili first, which is actually quite a nice segue to our first guest speaker, which is Titus Kazungu from Room to Read. And he will bring this a bit to life for us, so that once we have done the conversation about how does it actually look like, what does it take to develop these models, that we also can put it into a context where this can actually make a difference. So Titus, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Romana. Good day, everyone, from wherever you're joining us from. We live at a time when we are dealing with a global learning crisis. And I know many of you who are in the room are not new to some of these statistics. From the World Bank, we know that, for example, 9 out of 10 children are not reading at the required benchmark for 10-year-olds or doing the numerous that is expected from them. And this has been now for a while, but I think post-COVID, it even became a much serious issue because of just the fact that COVID messed up a lot of the systems that we had. And when you think about it, if children can't read, then the voice becomes the only thing that they can use to interact with themselves, but also with the world. We also know that, especially in the continent of Africa, many countries still have a challenge with data. And to appreciate the fact that data is a very sensitive issue, especially with government, but also with organizations working in the education space. And the potential for voice AI, therefore, becomes a really critical issue to consider. A lot of data is collected, but sometimes the quality might also be an issue that is wanting. To read, we've been involved a lot in data collection of different types through early grade reading assessments. And to say the truth, that the process of collecting, organizing, and sharing this data oftentimes is so cumbersome. It can also be very costly, but also it's time consuming. And when you think about other organizations who are still even doing pencil and paper, then the data collection may result even in terms of challenging data quality or questionable data quality. And so voice AI could be the solution to address some of these challenges, among others, as we will continue to see. I want to illustrate some of the challenges by using Tanzania as an example, and then maybe make suggestion of some of the things that could potentially be helpful. In 2014, in Tanzania, the enrollment in primary school really skyrocketed, which is a good thing when enrollment goes up. Therefore, many children, boys and girls, now are going to school. This definitely has resulted to one challenge that creates a ripple effect of other challenges. For example, it meant that the increased enrollment has large class sizes, especially in urban centers. Next slide, please. And with large class sizes, as you can see the sample there, it means that there are several challenges that come with that. One is it impacts teacher-student ratio. So you could find, like in this, maybe there are 150, 200 children against one teacher. The teacher might be in a corner somewhere, can't even move around the classroom to support classroom management, or even just support those who could be lagging behind. So teacher-student ratios therefore become a really huge challenge. The other challenge is learner-book ratios. While governments try to really provide for teaching and learning materials, the challenge of numbers always is overwhelming. We know, like right now in Tanzania, Tanzania Institute of Education and the ministry, both the President's office and the Ministry of Education are working really hard to get partners come to be able to have at least a ratio of 1-to-1. But as it is now, the ratio in terms of books can be in some places 1-to-5, 1-to-3, or even much more. Definitely, with such huge numbers and fewer teachers and fewer resources, it definitely impacts on foundational literacy and numerous outcomes. Some of the most recent data, for example, we see that only around 26% of grade 2 children are reading at the minimum proficiency, or in numeracy, it's even much lower at 14.6. So those kinds of numbers are really making the situation even more dire. But let me just share briefly, then I move to the next. One of the things we've been trying is to really assess children continuously so that we are able to see which areas are they struggling in and how can we be able to fix through something we call student tracking. Now, with student tracking, it means you have to assess every single child multiple times. You can imagine, like, if you have such a class, assessing all these children on several tasks multiple times within the year, and you have to mark those. You have to be able to analyze that data and reuse it for either remediation or helping the child to be able to move on and get better. That has become a really huge challenge, both for us as an organization, but also for the government, because just the sheer size of the numbers means that teachers are having to do a lot more in addition to just the heavy burden they already have of teaching different subjects across the school. So the question we want therefore to ask ourselves is, so what is the potential for voice AI? And I think we see it in several levels. One, it could be just in terms of continuing to support formative assessments, and also maybe supporting other types of assessments, whether those are summative or diagnostic types of assessments. We also believe that potentially we can use voice AI to be able to support teachers at the classroom level. If I have disaggregated data for all my children as a teacher, which I'm able to get it quickly and efficiently and with highest quality, then as a teacher, I'm able to use that data to really support my children. At the middle tier level, in terms of districts, we believe also it's possible to use AI there to be able to get school level data that can help to really support schools that could be struggling, or clusters of schools that could be struggling. But also at the national systemic level, it's possible to use some of this data coming from school, coming from the districts, to be able to really influence either curriculum review or other aspects of the systemic strengthening. In terms of what really matters in languages, that the things that are relevant for voice AI, I want to suggest a few things. One definitely is we have to be really faithful to languages across, as we work across the world, especially in Africa. We have seen situations where people come and do assessments, but they just transpose English-based approaches of assessments to African languages and Kiswahili in particular. And that sometimes is not very helpful because you are not being faithful to context or faithful to the language itself. For example, Kiswahili as a Bantu language, the structure is in a way that it's syllabic. So if you will just assess letter sounds and non-familiar words and oral reading fluency without assessing syllables, for example, it shows that you haven't been faithful to that language. So the syllabic nature of languages like Swahili and other Bantu languages across Africa is something that, as we go into looking at voice AI, we need to be faithful to ensure that we are also assessing things like syllables. The other aspect, which I think is also crucial, is thinking around the language in terms of orthography, the writing system. Kiswahili, being a transparent language, is important in my view, because then it gives us a case of the possibility of looking at this technology against transparent languages, which are many within the African context, and potentially use Kiswahili, therefore, to replicate the approach to other languages across the region. I want to also just mention that Kiswahili, like many other languages, has dialects. And these dialects could be cross-country, but sometimes the dialects actually just within the country. A good example is Tanzania. We have the Zanzibari Kiswahili and the mainland Kiswahili, which tends to be very different, and people are usually very protective of the words they use. I was in Zanzibar last week, and they insist on using skuli, which is a borrowed word from school in English, while the mainland uses Schule for school, which is a borrowed word from German. And all those kinds of pulls and push around dialects. And so when we are thinking voice AI and all the related work there, therefore, we need to ensure that we are sensitive to the dialects, but still being faithful to the standardized language. And here I will call us to be working with, like, the Swahili councils, for example, the Swahili Council of Tanzania, BAKITA, or the Swahili Council of Zanzibar, BAKIZA. Those would be critical partners in terms of working together to ensure that we are faithful to the language, but also we are sensitive to the dialectal differences across. We know, for example, that there's a push and pull between Kenyan Kiswahili, Tanzanian Kiswahili, and those are things that we definitely need to consider as we think about voice AI. I want to just summarize and say that potentially the use of voice AI could really help us to not only support children, but also to support teachers, and also help us with scaling and improving learning outcomes, especially if it's used well, and especially if all the ethical issues are taken care of. I want to submit and allow the next piece to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Titus. Very helpful context, and I hope it really helps everyone here in the room to bring it to reality and think of how this could really help. Now is the time to share a bit of what we have learned when we talk to the people working in the space. So I will hand over back to Orla. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Romana. And Usman, if you could just go to the slide before, please. So as Titus mentioned, voice AI does have the potential to have learning data at scale, but it's not as simple as just using the current ASR models that are out there. And there's a big reason for this. Next slide, please, Usman. Something that's very integral to ASR models is context. And we've got this slightly silly cartoon to help portray that. So as you can see in the cartoon, there's a teacher asking the student, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the child responds, I want to be the voice of a generation. And this is, of course, very exciting for the teacher to hear. And then the child says, like the Backstreet Boys. And because the teacher has the context and existing knowledge of the very popular band, the Backstreet Boys, she can predict that this is what the child was meaning to say, even if it's not exactly what was said. And this is very similar to the way that ASR models operate. They use context to predict what we're really trying to say and the intended meaning, especially when the audio isn't crystal clear or words sound similar. And this is fine for everyday use and voice assistants that we have in the home. But when it comes to assessment, especially with children learning how to read, we actually need the opposite. We don't want the models to smooth over mistakes because we need it to capture exactly what was said so that we can truly understand a child's ability to read. And this is a big challenge for ASR models. So it means that it's not just voice data that's needed to train these models, but the right voice data, and they must be trained to handle the right context. This means they need to be trained with children's voices, trained with data that covers the specific task at hand, which is assessment, the relevant context, which is classrooms, and finally, they need to be adaptable to low resource classrooms for the context that we're talking in. Next slide, please, Esmond. But before we get into these challenges and how they should be solved, let's have a look at what already exists out there, please. So this slide gives a snapshot of how voice AI is being used across different parts of the reading assessment landscape. On the top left, some are building very bespoke ASR tech to support literacy practice and assessments with very curated data sets and annotations that form their most valuable IP. Then just below, we have those trying to solve the automation of assessments. And then over time, we see this tech playing an increasing role in adaptive and personalized learning platforms, as seen on the bottom right. And we've had various conversations with EdTech developers who are thinking of moving to this space. And then finally, on the top right, there are read aloud apps that support children reading books, providing feedback in real time. Most of these solutions use 3 types of technologies, but for the rest of the session, we'll be focusing on ASR. So next slide, please. Over the last 3 months, we've conducted 46 consultations with different stakeholders to understand the current state of the voice AI field. And a lot of these conversations came from desk research as well as recommendations from people. So we spoke to a large group of practitioners, researchers, literacy and language experts, data handling experts, and legal experts. So next slide, please. Then what we did is zoom into those organizations and researchers who are specifically working on voice AI for oral reading assessments to better understand this more constrained domain. And this mapping actually represents just that group. And it's also worth mentioning that we focus mostly on Africa and South Asia. We didn't look into South America, for example, or other parts of Asia, where I'm sure there is lots of innovation happening as well. So what are the languages being covered? Well, at the moment, we're seeing voice AI oral reading assessments being developed in around 12 languages. And quite unsurprisingly, English dominates the landscape with 11 different innovations focused on it. As I mentioned, this list is just representative of the ones that we spoke to. But what's interesting is that English isn't just being used in traditionally English-speaking countries, but also in countries where there are other local languages that are being spoken by proportions of the population. There are 2 main reasons for this. Firstly, English is simply better supported and it's a high resource language. Secondly, it's the language of instruction in schools in some African countries. And so for these 2 reasons, it does make sense to start building these models with English. But it does raise an equity concern for those who only speak their mother tongue, and it limits us in reaching those that most need our support. Next slide, please. And we will be sharing these slides afterwards as well, just by the way. So once we identified what languages are being covered, we looked a little bit deeper into what exactly are these tools assessing. So this chart breaks down typical key oral reading tasks used in early grade assessments. So it ranges from phonemic awareness to fluency and comprehension. And these tasks are typically scored using word or phoneme error rate, with a lower score meaning better ASR accuracy. While we're on these tasks here, it's worth noting that there are other ways of assessing reading and to build models to assess reading, such as assessing tone or emotion, but they're just not the current focus here. So we're looking at data from 17 organizations. And in support of what was discussed previously, we can see that English, which is represented by the purple colour, is prevalent across almost all the subtasks. And we'll see that the majority of the people are working in is fluency. And there are several reasons for this. So firstly, fluency can give a quick sense of reading ability. Sorry, can we just go back, please, Usman? Thank you. So yeah, fluency can give a quick sense of reading ability, and so it's a good place to start. But secondly, fluency can be technically easier to build for, as it aligns well with how ASR models work. As mentioned previously in our fun cartoon, ASR models are built to use context and predict what comes next, which makes sentence level reading easier to transcribe accurately. So there's an example from the University of Oxford. There's a study. They used OpenAI's Whisper model without any fine tuning, and they actually still got strong results, around 13% word error rate on fluency tasks with Ghanaian children. So it's more achievable to start with fluency. But early decoding tasks like syllables or phonemes are much harder to annotate, and there's less context for the model. So those tasks often get overlooked, even though, as Titus was mentioning earlier, they're ready to in many languages like Swahili. So this gap highlights a real need, tools that are both linguistically appropriate and can handle the foundational skills that early readers need. There's honestly so many interesting things to say on this, so please do feel free to reach out after to continue the discussion. Next slide, please, Usman. So now we know what's out there, let's summarize the key pain points that the Voice AI oral reading assessment community is trying to solve. Firstly, off-the-shelf models aren't trained on children's voices, as it's very personal data and it's hard to collect due to data protection laws. There also isn't enough voice data for low resource languages, as mentioned in the previous slide, which makes learning less accessible for those who learn to read in local languages. As we now know, early subtasks like syllables and sounds or non-words cannot rely on text, and so therefore it's harder to get it right for these particular subtasks, which are crucial to the reading development of early grade readers. There's a challenge when it comes to noise, a trade-off between training a model with data from quiet conditions, which makes it easier for the models to understand what the child is saying, and training with noise, which better replicates real-world conditions and allows the models to be more robust to operate in real classrooms. Finally, to get high accuracy, typically trained with a huge amount of data, which makes them really large and not lightweight enough to be deployed in low-resource classrooms. So, these challenges are core to developing accurate ASR models for assessment purposes. The key question is, how are these problems being solved? I'm going to hand back to Romana and we can hear from the experts on this.
Thank you very much, Orla. And there is obviously a lot. Don't worry, we will also share a link at the end of the presentations where you can then also ask questions, and we'll very happily follow up and also share more on where you would like to go deeper. But now I'm very excited to come to our fireside chat, which will be what we will do until the end of the hour. And I would like to welcome our fantastic panel who is with us here today. They bring diverse experience from research, from tech, but also from field implementation. And given that we have limited time, I will not go into very deep bios. You can look them up online. But I want to just briefly welcome Nishant. Nishant Baghel, who is leading the digital initiatives at Pratham. We also have Peter Bell with us, who is a speech technology researcher at the University of Edinburgh. And last but not least, we have Preeti Rao, who is a professor at Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. So, what we want to do over the next couple of minutes is to shed a bit more light on the process of developing ASR models for assessment. You can go to next slide, Usman, please. We can keep it here because we want to start at the beginning. That means to start with the data collection. It sounds simple, but in practice, it's actually one of the hardest parts to get right. Because when you train the AI to understand how children read out loud, you need hundreds of hours of recordings. As you heard before, you need to consider different regions, different accents. And so it's not that simple. I would like to first turn to Peter and share a bit more about how we actually get good, diverse recordings of children to be able to build high. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Romana. So the main thing in any AI system is the old adage that there's no data like more data. So it's really important to have big collections of voice data. And the thing about children reading is that it's very difficult to get that. And it's difficult because children reading aloud is such a unique form of speech. It's completely different. When people read, generally, it's very different to spontaneous speech, but for children, it's completely different, and that makes it really challenging. It means that actually almost any other source of voice data out there is not going to help very much, to put it bluntly. So it's really important to get a lot of children reading. But alongside that, what you need is a really good coverage of the diverse accents, dialects, reading levels, ages. It's really important to get that. And so we think it's important to collect that kind of data at scale, and that means engaging learners and children as much as possible, give them a rewarding experience, and then to develop model building approaches that can just take that data in a very safe way, can use it once, can train, and then can move on, and so just immerse themselves in this really broad coverage. But I guess I just want to say one other quick thing, which is, of course, we want to get really accurate results. And we think that where you want to put effort in this area is in very carefully annotating test and evaluation data. So it's being sure that what we assess is absolutely accurate. But for that, you don't need large amounts of data. You just need people to have really sat down and spent a lot of time, had teachers, education professionals really understanding the nuances of what's in that data, and do that and spend the money there rather than have to collect lots and lots of training data, which would be the traditional approach in AI.
Thank you very much, Peter. What about you, Nishant? What is your view on this based on your experience? How much data do we actually need based on your experience in the field for assessing each skill?
Thanks, Romana. It is important to first consider the use case that we are working for, because we are working for assessment. It is hence all the more important to figure out subtasks and what we are going to target in terms of the final end product of what the speech recognition should be able to do. It becomes all the more important to focus on not just getting a phonemic coverage, but also getting a coverage in terms of the diversity of speaker abilities. Because we want assessment capability, hence it is essential that we are able to capture letters, words, phonemes independently of actually them appearing in sentences. Because when you have learners who are not at a reading level of sentence and above, they actually pronounce letters, words, and phonemes in quite a different way, and you need to be able to capture that. So the volume of data that we capture is dependent on the use case, and based on that, we can't just think of capturing the reading phonemic coverage and then divide it up and say that, okay, now we have a coverage of all the letters and words, and hence we are ready to build the system. It's important to think about the use case, think about what is needed. The other important aspect is making sure that the language complexity is represented. So for our work in India, we had to consider something called as conjoined words. And it is important to factor in the language complexity of, and Titus also raised this, of the language that you are working on. Because without that, it becomes something that you will train a model on and it will perform good on your test sets. But in the real world use case scenario, it will be limited to one particular type of assessment. And we don't want that once we collect the data and put in all the effort, the model itself is limited to only a few set of tasks and can't really be generalized to go further from there.
Thank you very much. Very good points that you both mentioned. For now, something that Peter already alluded to, once we have the data, we need to carefully label them. So we move to the annotation, right? So in my understanding here, we want to think of it on how we can teach the AI to listen like a skilled teacher would, right? So we want to really mark what the child says, how did they say it, where they pause, where they make mistakes. Preeti, I would like to now turn to you and to ask about your experience from building transcription pipelines. What would you like to share with the audience on your?
Yeah, my mic was muted. Yeah, thanks so much,
Yeah.
Ramona. Yeah, actually, Peter made a great point that we need very carefully annotated test and assessment data. But then, of course, to train our models, we also need some, actual transcribed data. And manual transcription is very demanding on time and resources. But if it is done well, it ensures, high quality data and, eventual fidelity to human expert assessments. So it's worth, paying attention to how transcription is done. And transcription, by the way, involves labeling, not just the words, but also other audio segments, for example, segments with disfluencies, background noise. So you typically need labels for all of these other audible events, that occur in the recording. And very importantly, even improperly articulated words, like a child who is not yet fluent would, utter words that are not well articulated. They also really need to be represented as they are sounded. So, all this makes annotation quite challenging, and which is why we need, at least another additional stage of verification. Even if it's one human rater, you need another human rater to verify. Now, to make the transcription more efficient, what we have been doing is, supplying a hypothesized text for each utterance. It could just be the prompt that the child is asked to read in the reading context. Then it helps the transcriber to just focus on, errors rather than, type out all labels from scratch. So we could, use some kind of bootstrapping, use existing ASRs and so on to help this effort. But yeah, all in all, it is something that is very demanding.
Thank you, Preeti. I wonder, Nishant, do you have anything to add from your experience? How do you, for example, make sure that everyone on the team is doing the transcription the same way, the labeling?
Constant checks and quality control. Quality control processes are the answer. We had an exercise at our hands to transcribe 1,500 hours of audio. And that meant that we had many more people employed and engaged in trying to do that transcription. And Professor Rao very correctly highlighted, it's not just about transcribing the text. You need to capture disfluencies, you need to capture, for the use case and target that you are transcribing for, you need additional labels. And hence you need the people to be trained on that. The other thing that we did was we took out a large part of our data set and got 2 annotators to annotate it at the same time. And that became a process of quality control for us from the get-go. And also as a way of making sure that the data set has got a certain part that has got very high inter-rater reliability. And these kinds of approaches to make sure that the process is verified constantly, and also you are not just labeling for the transcription, but you are labeling for your use case, helps with getting the data set ready for the kind of models that we are talking about here.
Thank you very much. And as we can hear from both of you, like it is a very intense process. So I know, Peter, you have been exploring some more automated ways to label recordings. Can you explain very briefly, and I know that might be difficult, but just to explain how this works and how can that actually help save time without lowering the quality of the results?
Yes, briefly is hard, but I'll have to go. So basically the success of modern ASR models is it really relies on massive amounts of data. It basically, you need that to get the generalization, like Nishant said. It's the coverage of the accents, the dialect, the speaker characteristics, the background noise, all these things that as humans we find super easy to filter out, AI finds really difficult. So if you're OpenAI, you go out to the web and you train on 1 million hours of speech, right? And what happens is that gives you the robustness. That's why we all like these kind of big models. But what they do is that they take captions that they kind of scrape and find. And in fact, we've discovered recently that if you run an OpenAI model and inject a bit of noise, it often outputs, "Thank you for watching this video." And it does that because it's clearly been trained on captions in YouTube that don't include that text. So it's primed to produce these kind of extra comments that were never really in the speech. So it is important to be accurate. But to get onto this kind of technical details, what we do is we say, well, look, we cannot get manual annotation effort at the scale that's needed. But what we can do is a middle way where we can model the uncertainty in the data. So we can say, we don't know what's being spoken, but we've got some level of uncertainty about it. And now let's bring in a bit of prior knowledge. Let's say we know the grade of the reader, we know the book they're reading, we know what mistakes they might have made before. And we look again at the uncertainty of the model. And what we're trying to find is instances where that uncertainty reduces, it shifts. So in other words, we didn't know what they were saying before, and we still don't, but we've got a better idea. And what our models do is use a kind of training objective that rather than relying on a hard label, they rely on just clawing away a little bit of uncertainty. And when that's operating at scale, we get results because we gradually, so for example, if there's a case where the child makes a mistake and we just don't know what's said, we would need to go to a human, but there might be other words where we're much more confident about the sound they're articulating because of the context or because of the book or because of the word it's being spoken in. And we can use that to start to tease out the fingerprint of what they might be saying. And that's a very, I guess, a very sort of high level summary. But just to say that we find this is very effective, even when the initial models are really poor. So we have taken an ASR model that got 90% of the words wrong in the first round. But after this kind of training, it can get 70% wrong, and then you do it again and you get 50% wrong. And by that method, you can gradually improve the model down to sort of 15, 20% type margins just by clawing away at the little bits of uncertainty. But it's a technical topic, and I've probably gone on too long already.
No, that was amazing. You did well, and I know you could give a whole lecture just on this. So don't worry. If someone here is interested to learn more, just let us know in the post-event survey, and we will follow up with you. But thanks to also bring up some new, different ways to do that. Well, now we still have another important step to cover, right? So now let's say we have this well-annotated data. The next question is, how do we actually build an AI that can understand it, right? And as we can see also on the slide, there are different. We know that there are different approaches to do that. Also, you already heard a little bit like there are different ways to do it also among the speakers and their experiences. So I would like to start with Preeti. You are normally building, starting with existing different models. So could you say a bit more about how do you decide which models to take, and then do you use different models for different parts of the reading task? Can you share a bit more about your experience with this?
Yeah, sure. So talking about different reading tasks, I think what would be interesting to know is how constrained is the task. For example, in terms of the expected responses. So for example, if it was very constrained, then we could probably greatly benefit from, let's say, an explicit language model that uses the knowledge not only of the prompts, but how those prompts are more or less expected to be answered and what kind of deviations we might have already observed from, let's say, some prior data. I think another important factor that comes up, especially in the subtask that you've defined, is how long is the utterance audio? Because I can imagine very short audios might prove to be challenging, and we may want to consider models that are robust, to that. And of course, in general, we know that model training with more domain data actually helps improve its accuracy. And for us, domain data would mean children engaging with the level appropriate reading material, including whatever material is used in the testing tool. And of course, we are never going to have enough of this data. So, we could compensate for this. As Titus mentioned, a lot of African languages share characteristics. So maybe borrowing from other languages, also using available diverse adult data. And, some of this, could help us with, very basic training on which we could build further with the appropriate domain data.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Preeti. And then over to you, Peter. What do you think, in your view, is the trade-off between building a speech model from scratch and building on an existing one? And maybe you can also consider the use in real classrooms.
Yeah, so I think the use in real classrooms is a really key point here. And in fact, I've just noticed in your sorry, I'm echoing slightly. I've noticed in the chat that someone who has been mentioning using cloud GPUs to run these kind of models, and for big models, that's what you need. But that is extremely expensive and really doesn't scale, even if you've got the internet bandwidth to allow 100 children to simultaneously connect to the web from their classroom. That's still 100 GPUs grinding away on those models, and that's just not sustainable, I think, for education settings. And the other thing, the important point I want to make is that those big models are typically multilingual. And actually, what that usually means in practice is that most of their parameters are actually just grinding through English. And it's very, very hard to throw that away, because they've learned that English is really important, and so they devote most of their parameters to English. And every time you use those models on that GPU, it's computing parameters that are essentially wasted for other languages. And they're really, really hard to kind of throw them away, because they're not labeled in the model, right? The model doesn't tell you that, and you can try and distill it down, but really you're wasting a lot of computation. So I think it's very important actually to train a model for the languages that you actually care about, in a way that can operate on a phone or at least a tablet in a classroom setting, because otherwise you will always run into limits to how well you can scale, I think.
Thank you. Now, great to have the different perspectives, and I'm sure we could just discuss this for another hour, but I know we are having only a few more minutes left. So with that, I would like to move to the last part, which is then when we have it, when the models are developed, we know that even the best AI models, they still need a reality check, right? So before we actually can use them in the classroom, we want to make sure, are they accurate, are they fair? And yeah, we want to test the models basically. So I would like to turn over to you, Nishant, to say why is it important and what is the good practice when it comes to evaluating the models?
Right. I think with any machine learning operation, you have to keep the test set holy and very separate. And that is important, that from the get-go, you have got the test set separated out. The other thing that is important in this use case is to test it in the real scenario, test it in the classroom, test it beyond what it was trained for, which means text that the model has not seen ever, which means testing it on questions or reading passages or words and letters that you did not specifically train on, because that just gives the kind of robustness that would be required to make sure that the model can be used not just for a defined experiment, but it can be used as a general purpose technology in reading assessment. And for that kind of testing is important. The other point that I would want to highlight is that this ability of the model to work in low resource settings is a point that has been raised a number of times, and it is important to design for that. And that's something that was very essential in the way that we were thinking about it, because for the scale of let's say India that we are operating on, we had to design something for an offline capability that can run on the edge, that can run on a smartphone. And that also then leads to a lot of changes in the way that you are testing the model. So it was not just testing the model for accuracy on the best available smartphones, but testing the model on smartphones that are low cost to check for the microphone signatures of those smartphones and the CPU capabilities, because those smartphones would not have GPUs, the CPU capability and how the model performs there. So when you again think of testing, getting away from just the for the lack of a better word, academic rigor of the word error rate, and getting into more of your use case. And in the use case, the kinds of things that would be important for the solution to scale become all the more important to test for.
Thank you very much. Well, I do see we are almost out of time. So I do think we conclude the discussion on the building of the model. I do hope that everyone has now a bit of a better understanding, for those of you who have not been so familiar, about how the process looks like, and you also maybe learned about some of the new approaches. Before we close, I would want to turn to all the three speakers, and yes, you can already keep this in the background, Usman, thank you. You can already start scanning the QR code, dear audience. I would like to just wrap up by asking every of the speaker Now, we heard a lot about the challenges. What are you actually excited about when you think about using the voice AI in education? What do you think the future holds for it? So who would like to start? Each 1 minute.
I can start off from a practitioner's lens. Specifically, we have been doing this learning model for many years now, which is teaching at the right level, and we do it in many countries outside India as well. And how this technology goes beyond assessment, and it is useful for informing the system on the program and whether the program is working, makes it easy to assess, and all of that is one thing. But for the first time, we have seen the ability of what we can achieve if we are able to understand the mistake profile of children at a subgroup level. We have recently completed an experiment where we looked at children who are at beginner and letter level, barely able to identify letters, and the kinds of mistakes they make. And that helps us define what kind of interventions they should get, which is quite different. And the progress that based on mistake profiles they make is different. So it is actually unraveling a lot of things that were unknown to us earlier, and is going to make many things much more efficient in the way that we operate on the ground. So a lot of possibilities, definitely, from a practitioner side.
Thank you. And it's amazing to hear enthusiasm. Maybe Preeti, I will turn next to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ramona. Yeah, I agree with whatever was just said, that I think the future is, and it is going to be really worthwhile, is to make voice AI not just for assessments, but to make it an active partner in instruction and pedagogy as well.
Thank you. And last but not least, Peter, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'm just going to tell a story actually from a reading aloud challenge that we ran with an AI assistant that listened to kids and just tracked their reading. It wasn't actually designed to assess them. It was just designed to encourage them and give them a different experience. And actually, we found that very unconfident readers are often scared to read aloud to classmates, and they may not have the support at home. And having an AI tool just helped them engage. And we had one child who had really struggled with mainstream schooling, and he took to this challenge and read and read and read hours and hours. He just devoured books, and he actually, when his teachers assessed him, he had gained 2 years of reading ability in 6 weeks when he used this tool. And I think if we can replicate that across the world, what an achievement that would be.
I think there is nothing more that is needed to be added. Let's end on that note. Thank you everyone very much for joining. There will be more. We will share more of the learnings on our website. And again, if you have any additional questions for the speakers or for us, please share in the survey. Thanks everyone.